Good morning. Yes. Alrighty. We begin on 10B. Let's see. Where did they tell me? 1 second. 10B, 5 lines from the bottom. Armali with Kahana. Okay. All right, we're in the middle of a discussion about who owns the dead ox. So one ox scores another and kills it. The owner of the goring ox is responsible for the damages, but who gets the carcass of the dead ox still has some value. Who gets that? So we had said up till now that we had brought a proof or few proofs that the carcass belongs to the original owner. He gets to keep the dead animal. So his animal is killed, he gets to keep the body. I'm only with Rav. So the reason that the Torah said he keeps the dead body, the carcass. So if the Torah hadn't said that, that was a proof that we ended with yesterday. If the Torah had not said that, then I would have thought clearly it had to say that, because otherwise I would think that the one who damages, the one who owns the attacking ox, gets to keep the dead victim. So Hashtag Islela Didi Kama Trefos. So why would you think that part of the compensation should not be the dead body, right? Let's say the ox, while alive, was worth $100, right? So kill the ox, I owe you $100, but you get to keep the $20. That's deducted from my bill, right? The $20 that the carcass is now worth. Okay, so I could pay you, since as we'll see in a second, since I can pay you with whatever I want. It doesn't have to be cash. It doesn't have to be anything that people consider useful or valuable. As long as it has value, I could pay you with a dozen carcasses, right? Like, why do we need to specify this? That the carcass is part of the compensation for the loss of the live animal. Without the Torah telling us at all, I could pay you in carcasses, right? So what's the difference between the carcass of the ox that was killed and some other carcasses that I happen to own that I could pay? If the mazik, the damager, has in his possession, a bunch of carcasses, he could pay with that. Yamamar. And how do I know that you can pay with, maybe the Nizak doesn't want to accept that. He's like, I want cash. I don't want your dead animals. I don't have anything to do with them. But we have a brisa, Yashiv l'rabos shava kesef. When it says you have to return, in other words, pay up, you have to pay up in the case of damages. It's not just cash. The Torah implies that anything of value can be used. Vafilu subin, even bran, right, which is considered, one of the less useful things. But it has some value. So if I have bushels and bushels of bran and they're worth as much as I owe you, I can pay you with bran. So likewise, I should be able to pay you with carcasses. So do I have to say that, specifically that carcass of the specific animal that was damaged, that was killed, that's part of your payment? Well, why does Torah even tell you that? So my answer is, you know why we know what those proofs were about that we brought yesterday? To assign the carcass to the original owner. It's not for the carcass itself. What it's assigning is the depreciation of the carcass. So when it's freshly killed, it's worth $20, but after a few days, it's deteriorated and decomposed, and it's worth only $10, right? And so let's say it takes a few days for the adjudication of the case and so on to determine who was responsible and so on. And so a few days later, who bears the cost of the depreciation? That is the nisa, the damaged party. So now the Gemara says, well, maybe that's who bears the cost of depreciation. Maybe that is a Tanaic argument. Tanya, if if something is torn apart, he has to bring a witness, meaning that yavi edim shenitrafa ba'ones. This is with a shomer, that if you can prove by bringing witnesses or by other means, I guess, if you can prove that the damage was caused accidentally, it was beyond your control, then you're exempt from damages. Shalom yavi aduda levesin. Bashal says that's not how we should interpret it. We should say what it means is yaviu aid means yavi aduda levesin. So he's kind of twisting the language a bit and understanding the word aid to mean the carcass itself. And the Mefarshim point out that Yaakov's bracha to Binyamin was Baboker Yochal Ad V'La'erev Yichal Shalal. So Ad means your prey that is vital. So in other words, you bring the carcass to the court, to Beis Din, and it gets appraised right away. So my love, maybe this is what they're arguing about. Maybe they're arguing about who bears the cost of depreciation. Gemara says, well, no, that's not it. Everybody says the damaged party bears the cost of depreciation. What are they talking about? Who has to deal with the cost? Right? It has to be, can't be left in the street, right? It has to, whatever, if you're going to tan the hide or something, has to be brought to the tannery. There are expenses involved in recovering this carcass. Who bears those costs? Those costs are not the responsibility of the dam. Rather, they are they're responsible of the original owner. But the Gemara says, but then we have another brisa. Acherim omrim minayim shal bala bar lahal sharmi baro. Another brisa says that how do you know that if you have a bore, you have a pit, and a ox wanders into it and is damaged, but who has to take it out of the pit? Talmud Lomar kasav yashiv v'alav v'hames. So we're parsing this verse in a way in which it's clearly not intended, but that's not the first time the Gemara does this. That you have to give back the money and the dead body, right? So really, what it says, v'hames yelo, you get to keep the dead body, but the way the Gemara is interpreting this is, you return the money and the dead body, implying that it's the damager who is responsible, just like he's responsible for repaying the value. He's responsible for the animal itself, for the dead animal, for the carcass. So this supports the idea that it is that the nizak has to, one second. Yeah, so just as the mazik has to return the money, he has to return the carcass. Okay, I said to Rava. So now let's examine this idea of the cost, bearing the cost of dealing with the carcass. What are we talking about? So maybe the idea is that you have a dead animal, dead ox, right? Now, if it's in the tannery, then it's worth, whatever. But if it's not there yet, if it's in the pit and requires a crane to come and lift it, maybe it's worth less. Um, or maybe it's not even related. It's probably not related to the effort. But if you ask somebody, I want you to buy this ox that's in the pit, or I want you to buy this ox that's in the tannery, right? They're going to pay if you're going to say that if those costs are different, that it's worth less in the pit, kitarach, but enough shitarach. So you're working for yourself. It's like the effort to get it out of the pit actually raises its value. So why is the Torah telling us that he has to that it's on him? It's on him because he's profiting from it. Amalei. So he answered, "Lo tzricha, not a problem. We're talking about where the value is the same. The ox is an ox; it's worth $20 as a carcass, and that's why the Torah is telling us who's responsible for getting it out of the or such a thing. Like that doesn't make sense to me, right? Like I would certainly pay more for an ox that's already in the tannery rather than one that's in the pit. Yes, it does make sense. There's a saying, Kashura b'masag bezuza, kashura b'davra bezuza. An ox is an ox is an ox. It's worth whatever it's worth in the barn. Or actually, here not talking about an ox, but a beam. A beam is worth the same out in the field or in the lumberyard. It's the same beam. That's what people say. So that is indeed what he claims, that the Torah talks about. The value is unchanged, and the Torah has to tell us who's responsible for transporting it from where the accident took place to where it is needed to be used. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, "Ein shamin lo laganav lo lagazlan, ella linzakin." When do you need to evaluate the value of the carcass? Not for a case of robbery or theft, only for damages. In other words, it's only for damages that we consider the value of the carcass that the damaged party still has, that reduces the bill of the damager. Okay, so theft, you got to pay the whole thing. The fact that maybe the dead animal is recovered, we don't consider that part of the payment. I say, says Shmuel, that even a borrower, if he is negligent and ends up with the dead ox, also it's unclear what he's saying. Also which way? We'll see in a minute. The Abba modally, and Abba meaning Rav agrees with me. So they asked, or is this what he meant? Shamin Baba modally? Did he mean that similarly for a borrower who's negligent, you do consider the value of the deceased ox, just like Nizikin, and that's what Rav agreed to. Or maybe he meant the other way around. Maybe he means the borrower is like the thief, in that we don't evaluate the value of the dead body. The Abba and Rav agreed with me. Tashma, let's see if we can figure out what he meant. Somebody borrowed an axe from his friend, Tavra, and it broke. So he owes him a new axe. Also, so he came to Rav Amalei. He said, "Zil shalim le nargamalia. Go buy a good ox for him," implying that he could keep the broken axe. Shmamina and shamin. So we see that you don't. He had to buy him a full new axe, not an axe less whatever the pieces of the old axe were worth, right? So Gemara says, Adarabba, no, you could prove the opposite. In that very story, Rav Kana Ravasi said to Rav, Dina Hachi, is that the rule? V'shasik, he didn't say anything. Shmami no shamin. So we see that Rav kind of, it seems like he made a mistake in ruling, and when he was called on it, he admitted it by being silent. So maybe this story actually proves that it's not the case that you ignore the carcass, or in this case, the broken axe. You do consider that in terms of how much to reduce the bill by. Itmar. So it's unclear which is correct. Itmar. Um, we have a statement, Amar Ula Amar Rav Elazar. Ula said in the name of Rav Elazar, Shamin Legana v'Legazlan. We evaluate the dead carcass in the case of a robbery and theft. Happy Amar Ein Shamin. Rabbi says no. Notice that Ein Shamin Lo Legana v'Legazlan. We do not. Well, show on Shamin, but for a borrower, negligent borrower, we do consider the remains, Kid Rav Kana Ravasi, like Rav Kana Ravasi said, just said. Now we're going to do a bunch of tangents. Since we resolved this with a statement of Ula, Ula came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, and in the previous story he quoted Rabbi Elazar, who Rabbi Elazar was from Eretz Yisrael. So now we're going to do another series of other things that Ula reported in Bavel of rulings by Rabbi Elazar. Let's say a woman has a miscarriage, and the process of expelling the placenta took place over the course of 2 days. And it starts in the late afternoon and continued till the evening, so that's crosses the border of 2 days. So the question is, when a woman gives birth, even if it's to a stillborn, there is a question of she's tame for either a week for a boy or 2 weeks for a girl, and then she's tahor for another 33 days for a boy or 66 days for a girl. So this case is referring to. Okay, so Moni Lamina Rishon, you count the days from when she started to have this miscarriage. Amalei Rava. So Rava says, "Ma data. What's your opinion based on? L'chumra, you think you're being more strict, like you're adding on a day, right? You're saying like start on the first day, that even on the first day she's tummy. Now, of course, the difference is like if she touches some truma or something in that state. So chumra dasa lidei kulahu. Actually, you're making it's a chumra, but it ends up being lenient. The commentaries lamirisha, because after the 2 weeks, if it's a girl, let's say after the 2 weeks of being tame, then she becomes tahor for 66 days. So like, yeah, good on you that you say, yeah, let's make her tame from the earliest possible time, but you're also making her tahor from the earliest possible time. So maybe you're doing it wrong. Maybe really you should start from the second day and extend for a longer period. Or to a further period. Elam Rava. So Rava says lachush chosheshes. So what do you have to do? So, you have to, in order to be cautious, right? Like to consider yourself in the cases of uncertainty, meaning the first day, and the last day of that period, you have to be concerned that it starts earlier. But but when you're counting the 14 days. We're counting from the second day. So in other words, we're going to give you a day on either end because we're not sure when exactly the prescribed period of tuma starts. My Kamashalan. So what's Ula, what's the chiddush here? What's he telling us? Dein mitzvah shilya below vlad. Maybe he's teaching us that like once the placenta or the stillbirth starts to emerge, it's got to be partly the actual, fetus has got to be part of that. In other words, like maybe he's telling us that even though the process only began on the first day, but we assume that part of that the actual fetus was actually partly emerging then. Whereas you could imagine that first there's whatever other material in their placental material or whatever is expelled first, and then maybe only after dark and the second day began did the fetus start to come out. No, we don't. So Ula was telling us that's not the case. You have to assume that the fetus started to emerge at the beginning. But we already know that. So now we're switching to the birth of an animal, right? So if let's say this animal is being slaughtered, and if the animal is slaughtered and it's pregnant, so the fetus inside, even if it's fully formed, doesn't need slaughter, doesn't need shechita anymore. It was part of the mother. What if it started to emerge already at the time that it was slaughtered? So asur b'achila. So if a birth started to occur before the slaughter, then we have to assume that that part of the animal had already emerged, part of the fetus had already emerged, and therefore it's not covered by the shechita of the mother. Simon Vlad Isha, Simon Vlad Behema, because it's the same for an animal or a woman. Like a fetus is a fetus, and the birth process is the same. So we already know from this that that at the beginning of this birth process, we're assuming that part of the fetus has emerged already. So, like, since we already know it about with the laws of shechita, then we should assume the same for the laws of tuma for childbirth. So the Gemara says, if we only had the Mishnah, I would have thought the yesh mixas shilya below flood. Yes, true. You could have the part of the placenta come out without any part of the fetus having emerged yet. Maybe there we're saying like we're just being overly cautious, and we're saying that they decided the rule would follow Misasa Atukula, that we're going to treat it as the emergence of the full fetus. So Kamash Malan. So maybe that's why the Mishnah would say that even though the placenta is only partly out, maybe that's why. Not because we're assuming that part of the fetus has emerged, but because we're just not going to differentiate between the partial emergence and a full emergence. So that's why we are actually assuming that with any part of the emergence of the birth material, part of the fetus has already emerged, and the woman is already tummy, or has to be considered already tummy. Okay, next case. Amar Ulam Rabbi Lazar, another tradition that Ula brought from Rabbi Lazar. B'chor shenitra b'tel shloshim yom. If you have a firstborn child, so firstborn son has to be redeemed, right? There's a pidyon haben. But what if the child dies before the 30 day, before the month is up? Like you do the pidyon ben after 30 days, right? Because if the child dies before he's 30 days old, and also there's no redemption required. Because the child is considered a nefel. In other words, it turns out that it was not a viable life, because as we can see that it died in the first 30 days. So that's the border for considering it hadn't been viable in the first place, and therefore there's no pidyon ben required. Said similarly, since the Torah says you should definitely redeem this firstborn, maybe it's like any child that's born alive, maybe requires pidyon, even if it dies within 30 days. So then the next word is ach, or the previous word is ach padot tifdeh. No, it's there's the word ach, however, which that turns it around and says that the however means that there is a case where you don't have to redeem it, and that would be if it dies within 30 days. Next case brought by a large animal can be acquired through pulling. Right, so there's all these ways that you can acquire movable property. So Ula says a large animal which is difficult to lift, you can pull it in order to acquire it. But don't we have another tradition that says like just like handing it over? So if you just like hand over the reins without moving the animal, that's enough to be a kinyan. Yamar Kiaitana, Ula was holding by a different. Both large and small animals can be acquired through pulling them. Rishon says they both have to be lifted. So I think we had in Kedushin, right, that if you want to acquire an elephant, there was one view that you have to lead it up an incline so that you're lifting it off the ground, as it were. But Ula would say, like the Chachamim, that it's enough to pull it. That's to make it move. That's enough to acquire it. Another ruling of Ula. Brothers are dividing estate. Mashaleh and Shamin. We include in the evaluation clothes that they're wearing. So in other words, not their own clothes, but if they bought clothes or they took clothes from the estate or they used the money from the estate to buy clothes, that's included, right? In terms of figuring out who gets what. Now, how we split the money. In other words, you already bought $1,000 suit from Brooks Brothers, so that's part of your inheritance. But what the clothes that they bought for their children, these are not counted. So Rashi explains that like since you don't, when you have a court case, you're not usually going to bring the children to the court. So we're assuming that the party waived their interests of whatever had been already bought for these children because they don't want to have to bother or to stress the children by bringing them to court. So they waive those rights. Amar Papa says, sometimes even what the brothers themselves, the heirs themselves are wearing or have bought from the money in the estate, maybe sometimes those aren't counted either. How is that possible? If you have the oldest son, because the oldest son is assumed to be representing the family in court, and the other brothers have an interest, the other heirs have an interest in having him look respectable so that he will be, there might be issues of debts that are owed to the estate or other things that the family wants to get approved by the court. So it's in their interest to have the brother who's representing them look respectable. So the fact that he took money from the estate to buy a nice suit is considered an interest of everyone, and that's not considered part of his share in the end. So similar to how an executor can take a fee from the estate, that would be a similar kind of thing, I think. Next case. Another thing said by Ula in the name of Rabbi Lazar, Shomer Shemasar Shomer. Let's say I give you something to look after for me, and you have to go on vacation, go on a trip, and you give it to somebody else to look after for you. Potter. So now something happens to it. So who's responsible? Am I the one who the owner entrusted it to? Am I responsible, or is the second guy responsible who I entrusted it to? So the middleman is not reliable. Not only if I'm doing the guy a favor, but I hired somebody to look after it for me. The aluye lishmiraso. So I'm paying somebody. So I'm buying a higher level of required shmira, right? Of responsibility. But afilu shomer, so they're like, for sure, I understand that, like, I've paid for better service than I was providing, so therefore I'm off the hook. But afilu shomer sochar shavasel sharvachinam, even the opposite, where I am being paid and I just pawn that responsibility off to somebody else as a favor, so he's not as responsible for the object as I was. He has a lower level of responsibility. So the responsibility of the keeping the object is actually lower. Nami Potter still I as the middle person off the hook. Shari Mosel ben Das, because they gave it to somebody who's who's qualified, who is he's a regular person and he can look after it as well as I can. But Rava says Shomer Shemasa Shomer Chayev. No, the middle guy is the one responsible always, right? Because he's the one I'm the one that the owner gave it to. So however I try to pawn off my responsibility to somebody else, I can't do it. I'm the one responsible. I accept the responsibility for the item from the owner. Not only if I give it to a less to a shomer chinam, like I'm being paid and I give it to somebody else for as a favor to do me a favor. So yeah, not only in that case am I ultimately responsible. I'll say that in that case I'm giving him a lesser level of responsibility. Even the other way around, if I'm doing it as a favor to the owner, and then I hire somebody to look after it for me when I can't do it, even so, I'm still responsible. Because the owner can say, listen, I gave it to you. You know why? Because I trust you. If you, and of course, with the shomer, you have to make a shvua. If something happens to it, but you feel you're not responsible, and you have to just take an oath that you didn't steal it or you weren't negligent beyond your. So the owner says, "Look, I gave it to you because I trust you." And when you swear an oath to me that you didn't do anything irresponsible with it, I trust you. But I'm having to be sure. But you gave it to some other joker. Like I don't trust that guy. I don't believe him if he takes the shvua necessarily. Therefore, you are still responsible. Ula said another thing from Rabbi Elazar. If someone owes a debt, comes to collect the debt, then you can collect from the debtor doesn't have any cash, but he has slaves, so you can collect by confiscating the slave. Nachman said to Ula, Amar Rabbi Elazar Afilu miyasmi. Did Rabbi Elazar say that even when you're collecting from orphans from an estate of orphans, because usually we're more protective of them. Lo So Ula said no. Mine only from the original debtor, so not from his estate. Not from his estate. So mine. So why did Ula say only from him himself? I feel if you're collecting from the person himself, from the debtor himself, so of course you can collect anything. Like what's the chiddush? You're telling me you can collect from slave. You can collect the shirt off his back, literally, is what the Gemara says. Like what's Ula telling us here? So we're talking about a case where the debtor designated the slave as property that would be it's like a lien, right? Like you're saying, this is the property that I'm putting up as collateral. Like the slave is collateral for this debt. And Kidarava, and that's according to what Rava says. Rava said, Asa Avdo Apoteke Umacharo. Let's say I make my slave collateral for a loan, and then I go and sell the slave to somebody else. So the collateral is what happens to collateral. Chov gova himena. So my creditor can still collect that slave. That slave was collateral for the loan and was subject to the terms of the loan. Even if I unethically sell it to someone else, my creditor can still collect that slave from the buyer of the slave. But shoro apoteke umacharo. But if you make your ox a collateral for that, then you sell the ox, and bochov govemenu, then the creditor is on sale of the ox, gets to keep the ox. It's not his problem that he didn't, assuming he didn't know that this ox was supposed to be collateral for the loan. It's no longer collateral. My time. Well, what's the difference between an ox and a slave? I usually call less like call because people know about this, right? When it's like real estate. Well, it says that real estate transactions, everybody knows about them. Same thing with an Eved, right? If I made the Eved collateral, then people know about it. So if somebody comes along and buys the Eved, he knows the risk, right? He knows that he's buying something that is basically under lien. So it's his problem. The debtor can still collect it. Okay, so we're going to continue for a while with this discussing this case, but I think we will pick it up again tomorrow at the top of 12. Have a good day, everybody.